We have invited all our members to come to Amsterdam today. Unfortunately, not all our members could come, but the majority of our members is here with us today. And we would like to discuss with our members and reflect back, and also with the audience online. For the audience online, you can raise questions when we later have the Q&A, and then we will try also to ensure that your questions are also taken into account. I have to say that we already received a lot of questions beforehand, and we also have questions ourselves for the panelists. Before we now start the panel discussion, I would like to first introduce the 4 speakers we have here today. First of all, and I'm not sure if they are already visible online, but we have invited the UN Special Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons, especially in women and children, Ms. Siobhan Mullally, and I hope she's already available online. Yes, thank you, Siobhan. Welcome very much here today. The other speaker we have with us today, and we are very pleased that she could also make it, is Ms. Diane Schmitt. In July, on 1st of July, she was appointed the new EU Anti-Trafficking Coordinator. So we're quite honored that she could make it, as this is one of our first public presentations with us today. Welcome very much also, Diane Schmitt. And then we have Waltraud, who is a project officer for the FRA, and she's very much experienced on the issue of civic space and how NGOs work within the European Union on issues of human rights. And she will tell us more later about all the bottlenecks they face. And last, but definitely not least, we have here sitting next to me Petya Nestorova, the Executive Secretary of the Council of Europe Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings. And she will speak with us today and explain more about their cooperation with NGOs within the Council of Europe region. So welcome all very much. Before we start the panel debate, we would like to show you a short video about Strada International, not only for our members, but also for the audience online and for everyone, which should give you a little bit of an impression of what we have been doing for the last 25 years. I would already like to apologize because it's hardly possible to include everything we've done over the last 25 years. And I have to highlight that we have 30 members at the moment. So to highlight 30 members over the last 25 years, plus we also tried to include a little bit the external important developments in the field. I would like now to start this video. We think this video I think this video reflects quite well who we are, what we do, and that together the International Secretariat and the members are trying to put human trafficking, awareness about human trafficking on the map, trying to support people that are trafficked and also exploited, because many of them are still not formally identified, doing prevention programs, run shelters, providing legal aid, and there's a lot, as you saw, that we have been lobbying for in the last 25 years. And as mentioned before, we could not even mention everything we did. The role of civil society, including that of Strada International, our members, but of course there are a lot of civil society actors in the field, is not always very easy. Of course, this depends very much where you are. Being based in the Netherlands, it might be easier, much easier here sometimes, than play an activist role and a watchdog role than it is in other European or non-EU countries. And we've heard this a lot from our members. Challenges raised from changes in the legal environment, specific legislation that is making it very difficult for NGOs to operate. We also see media that is sometimes harassing NGOs, and of course attacks to NGOs. We also see that NGOs face in general have limited resources, and it's very difficult for them also to continue their operations. We will talk about this further, because what we really would like now also to start the debate. I would like to highlight in particular that over the last years we got a lot of reports from our members in different countries how difficult it is to operate. And just to name a few, for example in Turkey, for example in North Macedonia, in Bosnia-Herzegovina and in Ukraine, it has definitely not been easy to work. We also know that in Hungary, we don't have a member in Hungary, but we know that in Hungary it's very difficult at the moment for NGOs. And also, we don't have a member in Cyprus, but we know that the NGO Kisa in Cyprus is very seriously harassed at the moment, and they might lose, or they actually already lost their registration as an NGO. So we would like to discuss all those challenges that NGOs face with the different guest speakers. And I would also like shortly to stand still with the situation currently in Belarus. Several of you know already, but the situation in Belarus is not very good at the moment for anti-trafficking NGOs. And actually we have one member in Belarus, Gender Perspective, which is currently seriously harassed, and actually they are under criminal investigations. On the 28th of September this month, their organization will be liquidated by the government. And I will also speak with Petya later today about this, because actually the Council of Europe is planning a monitoring visit to Belarus later this month. So without further ado, let me start now with the very first speaker, which is actually not with us today, but she sent in a statement. Her name is Evelyn Regner, and I didn't inform you yet about that she's not here with us today, but she sent in a statement, and Evelyn Regner is the chair of the FEMM committee, and she's based in Brussels as an EU parliamentarian member. Let us watch, because she shortly reflects on the role of civil society and what should be happening in the anti-trafficking field.
Hello everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to your conference that is taking place during the European Parliament's plenary, therefore the video message. The topic of addressing trafficking in human beings, unfortunately I have to say, is still a very prominent one. 10 years after the adoption of the European Union Anti-Trafficking Directive, and despite some progress achieved in recent years, a number of challenges still lie ahead. Human trafficking is not only a serious and borderless crime, but also a lucrative business. It's about money, driven by demand for sexual and other services. Criminals exploit vulnerable people, increasingly children, making high profits and taking relatively low risks. Women and girls represent a disproportionately high number of victims, both globally and at the European Union level. especially in terms of sexual exploitation. This form of exploitation is still dominant in the European Union, even though other forms are on the rise, such as exploitation for forced labor and for criminal activities. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought new risks and challenges, often resulting from the shift into cyberspace. And the gender dimension shouldn't be understood narrowly to refer only to women and to sexual exploitation. Forced labor, which mainly affects men, is a case in point. The strongly entrenched expectation that men must provide for the family makes them particularly prone to such exploitation and less likely to admit to having been exploited. We need gender-sensitive policies designed for female victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation, but also for male victims of forced labor. And here, you, the NGOs and civil society, become crucial. You are the first in line, working directly with people affected and know what they need. It is a hard job, and one we as politicians need to listen far more often. In addition, the new strategy on combating trafficking in human beings 2021 to 2025 added to our report with a focus on ensuring the effective implementation of the Anti-Trafficking Directive, though dedicated funding also to NGOs, with particular focus on gender-specific and child-sensitive aspects and taking infringement actions as appropriate. Improved data recording and collection to ensure reliable and comparable information for tailor-made policies. But our work is not over with this. We also call on a framework directive to prevent and combat all forms of gender-based violence, to complement the Istanbul Convention and the current national legal frameworks. Such a framework directive has to address issues like female genital mutilation, forced abortion, sterilization, marriages, and seek to tackle sexual exploitation, trafficking, cyber violence, the publication of revenge porn, and online hate speech against women, with a strong intersectional approach. And in all of this, civil society has to play a big role, especially when it comes to the concrete actions to be included. Many of you are already contributing, and I know that an NGO like Strada International, whose 26th anniversary we celebrate today, are crucial in information exchange. Unfortunately, political realities do not always allow it to go as far as we would like to, but the bigger the push from civil society, the better the regulation we can achieve in the end. Therefore, I thank you all for your work and wish to hear your loud voices also in the future. So thank you and lots of success.
Thank you, Evelyn Regner, and it's already good to see that she is actually recommending something to us to continue our fight and to have a very strong voice and to push politicians even more. There's a lot of things happening at the moment at the EU level. There is, of course, the evaluation of the EU Trafficking Directive at the moment. There's also the evaluation of the Victim Rights Directive at the moment. Plus, as we just heard, the EU is planning to maybe have a framework decision on all forms of violence against women. So we already, as Strada International, with our members, are closely watching and monitoring this. And that would also give me now a very good bridge to the next speaker, which we have with us online, Ms. Diane Schmitt. Welcome very much here to our conference today. I'm very happy that you could make it. I know you have only 1 hour to be with us today, but I would like to raise a couple of questions, and maybe later there are also some questions from the audience, if you are still with us. You were appointed as the new EU Trafficking Coordinator this year only on 1st of July. And as I said in the beginning, this is one of your first public events, probably, even though you're not with us. What I would like to ask you is to tell us a bit more on how you see the role of the civil society, in particular also in your role and your mandate to be the person that has to coordinate the actions against human trafficking at EU level and to work with all the relevant EU institutions, including civil society. Could you let us know what you do in your mandate to ensure civil society is part of this anti-trafficking action?
Thank you very much, Susanne. Thanks to La Strada International for the invitation. I mean, it's really a pleasure to be with you today. And as you said, it's one of my first intervention. I had other intervention at UN level also some time ago. I would have preferred to be with you today in Amsterdam, but unfortunately, because of the COVID situation and there are also so many things going on, it will not be possible this time. But I would like to congratulate you for the work you have done during all these years, these 25 years, which have been illustrated in the film. This shows how important civil society is in really fighting this terrible crime, which is trafficking in human beings. As you said, I took up my function recently, and I'm still in a listening mode. So also your discussions today, and even if I cannot stay for the whole meeting, I'm very much looking forward to get also a feedback. But because it's only if we all join our hands and make together efforts, we can tackle this crime. And this in this context, the civil society is very important. But we have to work all together: civil society, national authorities, law enforcement, judicial authorities, and also the UN level and the Council of Europe. I mean, it's a common joint work we have to do here. You mentioned the strategy on combating trafficking in human beings. I would like to use also this opportunity to thank you very much for the contribution you have done to the strategy. I hope your contribution and your preoccupations were correctly reflected. In any case, what is now also my role is to work on the implementation of the strategy, and you know there are a lot of actions. So you will have also the opportunity to come in this context, and we'll have the possibility to work together on prevention, on protection of victims, but also on the other aspects, prosecution and conviction. Because if we manage concretely to get more people, more criminals behind bars in the prison, and we manage to convict them, there should be also less victim. At least I hope in future. In the strategy, you probably noticed that we put an emphasis on the importance to work together with the civil society, and we have a specific platform which is the EU Civil Society Platform Against Trafficking in Human Beings, which meets twice a year, and we are also in contact through online. It regroups 100 civil society organizations, and we really count also on them to support us in the implementation. We are going to work. I'm going to work, but it's not only my job. I mean, it will be a joint work with the other institutions, with member states, and with you on 4 areas. If we follow the strategy, first is reducing the demand. I think this is very important, and there we have a quite powerful instrument, which is the EU Anti-Trafficking Directive. Our intention is to evaluate the functioning of the directive and to see if it's fit for purpose. This evaluation will be launched in the coming weeks. We have already published a roadmap, which you will find online, and we also look forward for possible comments. It explains also how we will do the consultation process. It is clear that in this evaluation, we will have a very, very large consultation, including of civil society. And I really count on you and on your members and on civil society in general to send us contributions as concrete as possible, which will help us not only to evaluate the situation, to evaluate if the legislation is fit for purpose, but also to see if there's something which has to be modified. One of the elements which we will look at more specifically is the question of criminalization of the use of services of traffic victims. This will be an important issue because if we get it right, it might help also to reduce demand. We will, in the meantime, of course, the legislative process is quite long, and also I was very interested in hearing Evelyn Regner, because she also underlined the importance the European Parliament and she attached to this issue. But in the meantime, of course, we will continue to support member states in the implementation of the current text, the legislation we have right now. A second element is the awareness raising. Awareness raising campaigns can help to detect and to prevent the crime, and there our intention is to organize a prevention campaign targeted to high risk sectors, and we hope that we can do this together with civil society, because I think we can only be successful here if we do it together with you and with national authorities. The second objective of the strategy is to break the business model of traffickers. And the focus in the past was very much offline, and I think we will add now a little bit more online, and we will also see if we have to change the legislation in relation to this. Our intention is to work more closely with internet and other companies who are very active there, and in order to track down those who try to recruit victims via social media or internet and exploit victims. The criminal justice response and law enforcement and judicial cooperation and all the actors which are active in this area have also an extremely crucial role to play in detecting, but especially also bringing down criminals who are behind this terrible crime. The third objective, and I think there you have really a particular role to play, it's protecting, supporting, and empowering the victims with a special focus on women and children. I mean, women and children are in general one of the priorities of our strategy. And here again, really, I think that the role of civil society is crucial. Early detection is important, referral for further assistance and protection, facilitating reintegration. I name only a few elements, and you know what are the problems on the ground. And again, here also, really, we count on you. We have, of course, the whole international dimension, and I'm very happy to be here with the UN, a special rapporteur on trafficking. We are working very closely with the UN, but also with the Council of Europe, and we'll do it in future. I had already several meetings with some other international organizations and agencies, and I think our priorities also converge. So I'm sure we will have good cooperation here. Interesting also for you might be that we are going to present before end of the month a new action plan on migrant smuggling, where there's a link between smuggling and trafficking. It's not the same, but those who try to come to Europe and often use smugglers and facilitators to reach Europe, or even outside Europe between other countries. They risk also to fall victims and victims of exploitation. So there are some links, and again, our objective, I think, is the same: is to protect victims and to crack down the business model of those who are behind. In conclusion, I hope I managed to reply to your question. But in conclusion, I must say I'm really looking forward to join forces with you and with civil society and to work together in the coming months. And I hope, yes, thank you.
Very much. I have a couple of more questions to you. And firstly, very good, you mentioned also the consultation that you launched for the evaluation of the trafficking directive. We know the deadline is ending today for that public consultation, and we will definitely let hear of us. We have closely followed also the strategy process, as you also reflected on. And I have already to say that we were actually quite grateful that the first time we met you, let's say online, because we were also present at this event that you referred to when you contributed to the consultations on the Global Action Plan. You raised already there the important role of civil society, and you also raised there, which really pleased us, I must say, you raised also the issue of demand, but then also in particular for labor exploitation, because sometimes we felt a little bit that the European Commission was too much focusing on sexual exploitation and the exploitation of women and children, while we also see our members on the ground see also a lot of men being trafficked for other forms of trafficking, and we sometimes have the feeling that the European Commission is forgetting about them. I would like to ask you one more question about this EU strategy, because what we actually discussed within our membership is, yes, sometimes it was not completely clear, and of course we understand it's a strategy plan and it's some of the actions still have to be further defined. But there's mentioning of a European referral cooperation mechanism. And in line with that, it's also mentioned that EU institutions should be on board and should be involved. And we just wondered if you can say a few words about this European referral cooperation mechanism and how we as NGOs can be involved there. Because of course, many of our members are currently actively working on the referral and the assistance of trafficked persons in Europe.
Thank you for the question, but I fear that I will disappoint you a little bit. It's perhaps good or bad news. I don't know. I think it's good news, because why will I disappoint you? I will not be in a position to give you more information than what you see for the moment in the strategy. I think it's extremely important to have a European referral cooperation mechanism. It's one of the priorities of the strategy. But I think we need to get this right. And in order to get this right, we are not yet there. We have to think about it, we have to consult. And there also, again, I would like to listen to you, because you have to tell us what are the problems. You know that in the directive, with the directive, the Anti-Trafficking directive, we ask already member states to set up such a national mechanism for early detection, assistance and support of victims. We have done also a study in the past, and there are still challenges, and there's really, improvements are needed, especially concerning cross-border cases. So I would like to look into this, but again, I really would also like to have your feedback. I know we have, in the past, we have supported financially a project which was also a transnational cooperation project which was going into this direction. I think we have to learn the lessons from this. And before I can give you more detail, I really, again, want to listen to you. And if you have specific ideas, don't hesitate. I want to come back to one point. Indeed, we have published the roadmap, but this is the beginning. It's the process in view of the evaluation of the directive and the modification of the directive, if we propose a modification. But the evaluation process will take some weeks. And we will make another open consultation based on some questions, and where you can also give more in-depth feedback. So the deadline we have now for this roadmap, which is on the 16th, if I'm not wrong, it's not the last chance. It's only a beginning, and so you will have other opportunities to come in future.
Thank you very much for that. Definitely you will hear from us about that. Actually, tomorrow we have our annual meeting, and we will actually look together what we think about the revision of the EU directive, because we are still not completely sure that it's no longer fit for purpose. Actually, we see mainly a lack of implementation of the current anti-trafficking directive. And yeah, we doubt a little bit if a revision actually would improve that implementation. And also, we will discuss the ideas that the European Commission has about a new instrument on violence against all forms of violence against women. So we will have it actually on our agenda tomorrow. I would have one more question to you, because as I mentioned, this debate is also a little bit, it's also focusing on the role of civil society and the harassment faced. And actually, I mentioned already one NGO, KISA in Cyprus, not a member of us, but a very close partner. They work on anti-trafficking, but also on supporting refugees and migrants, and they're seriously harassed. Why I say this is that we actually sent a letter to Mr. Olivier Odini, your predecessor, to also wondering, and not only to him, but also to Petya Nestorova and to other people, to also see actually how international governmental actors that are active in the field, how they actually can help to reduce the shrinking space and to raise a voice when such occasions happen. Can you maybe reflect on this? What can you do as an AU anti-trafficking coordinator if one of our members, or in this case KISA, is harassed? What is your role and what can you do?
The question you raised is extremely important, and you mentioned it also in your introduction that some NGOs have pressure and have difficulties in some states, including some member states. It's a very serious problem, but it's a problem which is not related only to NGOs which are active in the area of trafficking against human beings. It's a larger problem which we have to address. And you know also that the Commission is extremely concerned about this, and we are following this closely also to uphold fundamental rights, democracy, and the rule of law. Yes, your letter was addressed to Olivier Onidi, and to my knowledge, you also received a reply which explains our position. Also, what I said, that of course we underlined also that we continue to pay special attention to any attempts to pressurize civil society organization in any member state, and we will continue to support the work. I mean, as I said, this is larger. This is I will support as much as I can internally, but I hope you understand that that this is picked up at horizontal level, and and especially also by the Justice and the Commissioner in charge as regards KISA. I understand they have filed an appeal before the Cyprus Supreme Court. And well, that's the situation right now. But I think I'm worried, and everyone has to be worried when NGOs are not in a position to do what they are supposed to do in the context also of upholding fundamental rights, democracy, and supporting, in this case, victims of trafficking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I also asked this question especially because I know that the European Commission is actually, or the European Union is responsible in the UN review mechanism to look and to review Cyprus and Greece. So that's why I mentioned it as well. I fully agree with you, and we're also aware of it, that sometimes we in the anti-trafficking field are still the lucky ones. There are, of course, a lot of NGOs working with refugees directly, but also being more political engaged, that are much more addressed and harassed. Although we see a change, and as I mentioned also in Belarus, even the anti-trafficking NGOs face a lot of obstacles. But we will discuss that further. Thank you so much for being willing to be here with us. I hope you can still stay a little bit longer online. There might be questions later, but I also understand if you have to leave. Let us go now. Let us go now to the next speaker online, which is Siobhan Mullally, based in Ireland. Welcome very much, Siobhan, and I'm very happy that you could be here with us today. I think you do not need so much further introduction because everyone knows you as the UN Special Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons, especially women and children. We know that you as an anti-trafficking rapporteur, you can raise issues in the different countries, you can do country visits, and you can study the trafficking situation. Could you explain a little bit more how you, as UN Special Rapporteur, see the role of civil society in relation to your mandate? And could you also explain how you actually work with civil society as UN Rapporteur? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and it's very nice to see everyone. Congratulations to La Strada on your 26th anniversary and on continuing such important work internationally to promote the human rights of victims of trafficking and to strengthen our international human rights framework to protect victims. In relation to the role of civil society, certainly concerning my mandate as UN Special Rapporteur on Trafficking in Persons, the role of civil society is critically important. It's provided for, as you know, in several legal instruments, including in the Trafficking in Persons Protocol, the Palermo Protocol. Article 6 specifically refers to the role of civil society in the provision of assistance and protection of victims. And of course, the Council of Europe Convention on Action Against Trafficking in Human Beings, which I'm sure Petya will discuss, has a specific role again mandated with regard to working in cooperation with civil society, including NGOs. And in terms of my mandate in reporting to the UN General Assembly and to the Human Rights Council, my mandate has always highlighted the critical importance of NGOs in prevention and protection work and in advocacy in terms of protecting the human rights of victims. And civil society is interpreted and presented broadly to include trade unions, of course, as well as NGOs, faith-based groups and others. And not only in the provision of services in identification and protection of victims, where NGOs play a critically important role, but also in terms of advocacy for strengthening legislation and policy frameworks. Specifically in relation to identification and assistance of victims, of course, my mandate has always highlighted and emphasized the importance of a multi-agency approach and a cooperative approach and effective referral mechanisms involving NGOs to ensure timely identification of victims of trafficking and also the provision of assistance, including early legal assistance and representation. So civil society is critically important and has been in terms of the work of my mandate. But in terms of the methods of a UN Special Rapporteur and how we work and the special procedures, civil society is important in bringing information to the Special Rapporteur to enhance the thematic reports that are presented to the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly. So, for example, in my first thematic report to the Human Rights Council on non-punishment, we received many important submissions from NGOs and also had consultations with NGOs to strengthen that and to bring that. And that becomes part of the lawmaking process as a report to the Human Rights Council. It's a soft law instrument, but it's one that can be cited subsequently in terms of promoting law and policy reform or in strategic litigation. In my upcoming report to the General Assembly, which looks at trafficking and the nexus with terrorism, including in the context of recruitment, which affects countries of origin across the European region. Again, it was important to consult with NGOs and those in the front line working with victims and trying to provide assistance and protection to highlight the specific kinds of obstacles that can arise. And that work has also informed, for example, an intervention to the European Court of Human Rights in the pending cases of HM and HF versus France in relation to the questions around repatriation of potential victims of trafficking from northeast Syria. And through the communications process, which is how special procedures react to individual cases or evolving situations. So it's a very easy process to engage with. The special procedures are not judicial mechanisms, they're not quasi-judicial mechanisms. So we don't have the requirement of an exhaustion of domestic remedies. The communications process is set out on my website, for example, of the Special Rapporteur, and we can receive a submission from an individual victim or from an NGO, and that can be in relation to a specific violation of human rights or a concern around a pending piece of legislation that may include regressive measures, or it can raise concerns around a policy context of failure to take action. So it is flexible in terms of the kind of information received. And once we receive a communication, we can then respond in a number of different ways. So it may be through an urgent appeal, where there is a rapidly evolving situation that may involve violations of human rights or a piece of legislation that is about to be adopted. Or we can issue an open letter, which is something that we do in particular in the context of pending legislation or policy concerns, or a wider contextual situation that NGOs bring to our attention. And the other tool is the allegation letter. And there we would usually receive information in relation to specific violations of the rights of victims, and that may be from victims themselves or on their behalf. So it may be from an NGO, for example, or a trade union. And there we write quite a detailed communication to the government. We may issue a press release at the same time, or we may wait for the government's response, and then the allegation letter and the government's response become public. And we may also engage with the media around that. And all of those communications are reported in the annual report and communications to the Human Rights Council. So it becomes a public document that can then be used in different ways also. To give an example, currently finalising an intervention to the UK Supreme Court on a case involving trafficking for the purpose of domestic servitude in a diplomatic household, so the question of diplomatic immunities. I mentioned the case at the European Court of Human Rights, and we've also engaged with treaty bodies around pending communications. So those are some of the different ways in which we work, but it's really critically important that we have this effective engagement with civil society. And I think what's also important is, in terms of responding or engaging on human rights issues, my mandate works closely with other special procedures. So the Special Rapporteur in Human Rights Defenders, for example, the Special Rapporteur in Human Rights of Migrants, on freedom of peaceful assembly and association, engaged with me on the communication to Cyprus, for example. And that, I think that is really important because it highlights that the concerns being raised are wider concerns around human rights protection and the role of civil society and the protection of civil society space. So I think that's important in terms of that engagement across the UN special procedures and joining together to engage with the state to try to secure change or address an urgent situation. Thanks.
Thanks very much. My next question was actually planning to ask you a little bit more how NGOs can make use of your mandate and also their watchdog role, but I think you reflected already quite a lot on that. If I may add one additional question, maybe you can say a little bit about it, and then I have one more question to you until we also later open the questions from the audience. I was wondering, do you see a specific role for NGOs that they maybe not take up yet, or do you see a specific issue if you think about the anti-trafficking field and the current developments, what NGOs should take more up? Do you have a specific opinion on that? I know it's just a new question, but I was just wondering, could you comment on that? Because you mentioned what NGOs, how they can make of your use of your mandate. But do you also see where maybe NGOs could take their role a little bit more?
Sure. Thank you, Susanna. Obviously, I know NGOs have limited resources, but I think it's really important in the anti-trafficking context to engage more widely with human rights bodies. Engaging with my mandate allows me to react and engage with states. It has to be on the basis of information received. And the sooner we receive it, the sooner we can begin to respond and do the work needed to engage with states. So it really strongly encourage NGOs to engage with the mandate, but also to look at the trafficking context in a wider context. You know, for example, in relation to business and human rights, there are significant developments ongoing at EU level around due diligence and supply chains. There's a whole question around the tech sector, and also the importance of cooperation with trade unions and other organizations to highlight the labor exploitation context, which La Strada, of course, does. But I really think linking into that wider human rights framework is important in terms of having that coalition to raise concerns. One area, if you're talking about a substantive context, I would say is, and I hope that I will have the opportunity to undertake a thematic report around, is the question of the intersection of trafficking in persons and the rights of persons with disabilities. I think that's a neglected area from both sides, both in terms of those of us working on human trafficking and on the rights of migrants, and also from the side of the disability rights advocates as well. So I think that is really important in terms of highlighting the obligations of reasonable accommodation, but also prevention and protection in that context. I think it's important to link trafficking into wider movements around racial justice and the safe, orderly and regular migration, so migrants' rights more broadly. I think that does happen already, but really linking into the movements around racial justice, I think, are critically important as well. And highlighting the increasing risks around drivers for forced displacement in many contexts, so conflict settings, climate insecurity, all of those as well. So I think making those links across also strengthens the voices of anti-trafficking advocates. And I think, as you said, you know, we are seeing, to some extent, anti-trafficking advocates were not targeted as much as advocates for the human rights of migrants more broadly. But I think that's not always the case. It depends on the country. And of course, where organizations that are working to support migrants can't operate safely and effectively, that also endangers victims of trafficking and anti-trafficking advocates. So those kinds of coalitions, I think, are hugely important. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I still would like to ask you a little bit later, because I think we go to the next speaker, and then I would ask, stay online, and then I would like to ask you maybe also how you can raise the issue of the shrinking space further as UN Rapporteur. But let us go now to the next speaker, who is actually with us here in the room. Petya Nestorova, very much welcome. I already introduced you. You are one of the persons that we as La Strada International have very closely cooperated with. And from the beginning, also Greta has been very clear that NGOs are welcome and NGOs can contribute. Maybe you can yourself explain a little bit more how NGOs are involved in the monitoring work by Greta, and how you also collect information from NGOs.
Yes, thank you, Susanna. I'm really happy to be here today. It was definitely worth the long train journey. And I've just realized that the 26th anniversary of La Strada International is also my 26th anniversary of the Council of Europe. An interesting coincidence.
Congratulations.
And yes, thank you. The Council of Europe, as you probably know, actually considers civil society and NGOs as a key partner. And the Council of Europe Anti-Trafficking Convention, of which I'm the Executive Secretary, or have been now for over 11 years, would not have existed in its current shape if it were not for the very active participation of international civil society organizations during the drafting and negotiations of the convention. Of course, it is not perfect as any treaty which has to be negotiated by governments, but many of the provisions of the convention have been impacted in a positive way through the engagement of civil society. And of course, the convention, as you know, explicitly recognizes the important role of civil society in fulfilling the objectives of the convention. Starting with prevention and then going through the identification of victims of trafficking, the provision of assistance to victims, also in the context of repatriation. And there is this concept of strategic partnerships with civil society, which we can come back to later. I learned from my first experiences at the Council of Europe, which were with the European Committee for the Prevention of Torture, that whenever we do monitoring, we have to listen to specialized, experienced civil society organizations right at the beginning of a monitoring visit. And we also have to protect those that share information with us. So Greta, the group of experts which monitors the Anti-Trafficking Convention of the Council of Europe, engages with civil society in order to collect information, sending the questionnaire to civil society. Sometimes we receive joint coalition responses, which is very useful, coordinated by some of your members. Here, I want to stress once again, the information we receive is treated as a confidential source of information. It is not directly quoted, and it is extremely useful. By the way, the Strada International and other international organizations participated in the designing of Greta's third round questionnaire by sending their suggestions as to questions which might be put, because the focus of this round is on victims' access to justice and effective remedies. So yes, the first step is collecting information through the questionnaire and then supplementing this information through direct meetings when we manage to have monitoring visits. We have not been so lucky, obviously, in the last year and a half, but I feel encouraged now because last week we had physical visits to Bosnia and Herzegovina and Armenia, and we have 2 more this month, so things start looking a bit more positive when it comes to monitoring visits. So we really insist on meeting civil society at the very outset of the visits on the first day, which is usually dedicated to such meetings. And when I say civil society, of course it is specialized anti-trafficking organizations, but it is important to stress that Greta goes in a broader way and meets also organizations working with migrants, with asylum seekers, with ethnic minorities, which are particularly at risk for human trafficking, with professional associations and of course trade unions. So civil society understood in a broader sense. And then just continuing with how we work with the civil society, after a report is produced and published, there are possibilities for civil society to provide input on how the recommendations are implemented, either through sending what we call communications, where sometimes we get sort of signals that things are not happening as they should be, and then Greta can engage with the authorities through a letter or through high-level talks, as we have had in France, for example, in order to make sure that this dialogue on implementing the convention is in a way strengthened and reinvigorated. So NGOs are really our eyes and ears on the spot, if I may say so. There are many other ways in which we engage. For example, the rules on the evaluation of the convention, Greta's rules, they mention the possibility of holding periodic hearings. And there have been, to my knowledge, twice such hearings with the civil society organizations. I was thinking a couple of years ago that the time was ripe for a new one, but then COVID came and delayed it. But yeah, maybe there will be another opportunity in the near future. NGOs also participate as observers in the Committee of the Parties of the Convention, which is the more political pillar of the monitoring mechanism. And for example, NGOs and Strada International have been observing the elections of Greta members, the selection of Greta members where civil society should be represented is something that you have observed and been very proactive in really promoting Greta members as, who are from civil society. And there are very other ways, such as recently we provided grants to civil society organizations in the context of the COVID pandemic. Maybe they were a drop in the sea, but still I think they provided some possibility to several NGOs which were selected through a tender to work specifically on the protection of victims' rights in the during the COVID pandemic. So yes, these are the main tools that we have for working, and I'm really grateful that Strada International and Amnesty International provided some time ago guidelines to NGOs on how to report to Greta. They are available on our website. Maybe we should look them again. Yeah. Yes.
Yes, definitely, we can do that again. And actually, Anti-Slavery International was also involved. You mentioned it already shortly. There's a special article, actually, in the convention that specifically relates to the role of civil society. And it also mentions that states should actually start strategic partnerships with NGOs. Now, you have been to many countries. You've followed for the last 11 years. You have followed the work of the different countries, the states. You've seen a lot. So I just wondered, can you reflect on that? Do you see good strategic partnerships by governments and NGOs, or do you also see things that do not go so well in the different Council of Europe member states?
Yes, we have seen different scenarios, ranging from a very inclusive approach to keeping civil society at an arm's length, or even the extreme cases, intimidating and harassing civil society organizations. We'll come probably back to this. Of course, Greta is in its reports now has special sections called Cooperation with Civil Society, the link being made with exactly Article 35 of the Convention, which actually says that states shall encourage the national authorities and agencies to engage with civil society organizations in order to create strategic partnerships for the purpose of fulfilling the purposes of the Convention, as you said. So these strategic partnerships are understood, of course, by Greta, interpreted by Greta as involving civil society organizations in the planning, implementing, and then evaluating of anti-trafficking measures. Ideally, civil society organizations should be involved in national coordination fora, various working groups which are set up in order to push for policy improvements or legislative improvements. In some countries, they're involved actually in what are national rapporteurs. When national rapporteurs are like in the Netherlands, they are human rights bodies, institutions. I know that, for example, in France, NGOs are part of the so-called, broadly speaking, national rapporteur. So that is also important when it comes to monitoring the actions of state bodies. Another positive engagement of authorities with NGOs is when there are specific memoranda of understanding with NGOs, which in a way provide continuity and a long-term partnership. As we all know, in many countries, NGOs are service providers for victims of trafficking on the basis of periodic tenders. The good practice here is when this is sustainable and long-term, as opposed to annual renewals of contracts, which of course is not far from ideal. So these are the good examples. We have, of course, less positive, less good examples, well, worst examples in situations where NGOs are not part of coordinating structures, or they invited sporadically when someone feels that they should be invited. And a concern, of course, is when the funding which is provided in situations where NGOs are service providers, the funding is interrupted, comes late, or is, as I said, provided only on an annual basis, making it really difficult to plan and to have sustainability.
Yes, I have a last question for you, and I also realize that I have to take into account the time a little bit, because we of course want also questions from the audience. One more question. I mentioned in my introduction that actually Greta is going to visit Belarus by the end of this month. I can imagine that it's quite hard at this moment to interview NGOs there, and also to raise the issue of the shrinking space of civil society in Belarus. Can you say a little bit about your visit there and what you can possibly still do to raise the issue?
Yes, Belarus is not a member state of the Council of Europe, but it was the first non-member state to join the convention. They actually actively wanted to join the convention. Already evaluated once. I was part of the team that went there almost 6 years ago, and they have been due for evaluation for over a year, but because of COVID and other reasons, that evaluation has been delayed. So in fact, Regner has received a reply to the questionnaire, which is publicly available on our website a year ago. So the visit is finally happening, hopefully. And of course, in the meantime, there has been a clampdown on civil society organizations in the country. Various bodies of the Council of Europe have been reacting very strongly. The Human Rights Commission of the Council of Europe, Diane, which has reacted, but also recently the president of the Conference of International NGOs, which is an important body of the Council of Europe, has also reacted. Obviously, we, as I said at the beginning, Greta protects the sources of information, be it civil society organizations or victims or lawyers that we meet. It will not be possible, clearly, to meet many of the specialized NGOs organizations in Belarus. There are some who are probably closer to the authorities still working, I understand, so we'll do our best to meet them. And of course, I think it goes without saying that the Greta rapporteurs in their meetings with the various governmental interlocutors will have to raise the question of how the convention provisions, which I refer to, which are exactly about the role of civil society in prevention, assistance, protection of victims, how these provisions are being met by Belarus, how is the country meeting its obligations when it comes to the role of civil society. So these will be questions clearly asked, and of course then the report will, as usual, have a chapter on the role of civil society and the engagement of the authorities with civil society. Yes.
Thanks very much. We will look forward to see the report in the end. Without much further ado, because definitely we want to give you also the right to raise questions, I would like now to go to the last speaker, which is who is again with us online. Thank you very much for also agreeing to meet with us today online. Her name is Waltraud Heller, and she works for the FRA, the Fundamental Rights Agency in Brussels. And the FRA is known for, she's a project officer specifically working on civic rights issues, but also on the civil society platform. Maybe I say it not correctly, but the platform by the FRA for civil society. And the FRA has done a lot of research actually on the issue of the shrinking space. And one report was in 2018 published, but I also know you're still working on reports. Could you maybe tell me a little bit more about this research, but also what you what NGOs have told you about the shrinking space. And interesting is that you focus only on AU countries. I haven't asked this question to Siobhan, but of course, if we look globally, the situation might even be worse. We talked about the Council of Europe situation, where we also see the issue in several countries. But actually, sometimes people think that in the AU, everything is going well. So I was wondering, could you tell me a little bit more about the findings of your research?
Yeah, thank you very much for the invitation, and also to be able to be here online, because otherwise it wouldn't have been possible to come. So yes, the Fundamental Rights Agency, I know actually that you yourself, but also many of your member organizations are part of our fundamental rights platform, which is the civil society network that the agency has. So maybe I do nevertheless say one word about the agency. So we are an independent EU body who advises EU institutions and the other member state governments on how to better implement human rights. And by the way, we are not based in Brussels, but in Vienna, like many agencies are. It's not a problem, but are spread across. And so we work with this fundamental rights platform, and actually those of you who are not yet in this network are warmly invited to join. It's a platform for mainly information exchange and peer learning. So we noticed several years ago already that more and more organizations were saying, there are issues, here are issues, this is problematic. And so we started looking into the challenges that organizations are facing. And so our mandate is fundamental rights. So we just came from this idea, how can civil society organizations fulfill their important role in helping to implement fundamental rights? And what are the obstacles? And so actually, the situation, first of all, in the EU, yes, there are problems. It was before, so we started working on this about 5 years ago. Before, it was really, civic space was seen as an issue that concerns outside EU organizations. So for inside EU, it was always thought, this is not really an issue. And so when we started working on this, there was also not much research. So what we did is we came together with leading civil society organizations and practitioners, and we came up with an initial mind map of 60 potential issues and problems that civil society organizations in the EU can have. And if you're asking me about the situation in the EU, I can't give you one answer for the entire EU, because the situation and the possibility to do the human rights work depends not only on the country, it depends sometimes on the topic that an organization is working on. And you, Susanne, you already mentioned that a bit, that organizations, for example, working with refugees, but also with gender, LGBTI, sexual and reproductive health rights, etc., are facing increased more pressures than some of the other organizations. But then it also depends within a country. Out of these 60 potential issues, there might be some that are really posing a challenge, but there might also be some that are actually quite good in that same country. So it's overall a very complex situation. And also, COVID, of course, has further aggravated the situation for many organizations, but we can come to that later in the discussion. But you know that yourself. I mean, on all the different fronts, COVID has been a problem. It has been a problem in the practical project implementation, doing meetings, sticking to deadlines in the project proposals that is funded by donors, etc. But it has always also been for many organizations, I think not so much for trafficking organizations, because sometimes you have a specific recognized role, but for some of the volunteer organizations in particular, it has not been possible to access the people that they want to serve physically, etc. What are these main areas? I said 60 topics, so we clustered them into 4 main areas of concern. The first one is the legal framework. So organizations can, when we say legal framework, we mean all the laws that can have an impact on how civil society is working. So, of course, this is freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of expression mainly, but sometimes also laws that we don't even think of, such as tax laws or the side effect of counterterrorism legislation or lobby legislation that sometimes, or transparency legislation that sometimes made it much more difficult for organizations to access policymakers, for example. And so the agency, we do annual research on this, but we also do an annual consultation with our civil society platform. And in the last consultation that covered the year 2020, just to give you an idea of the sort of the size of the problem, a third of the respondents said their organization faced in 2020 challenges in freedom to peaceful assembly. And a quarter faced challenges in freedom of expression, and almost 20% in freedom of association. So freedom of assembly, that would be the right to demonstrate in the streets, for example, to hold online assemblies. Of course, COVID had a strong impact on the freedom of assembly. Or the freedom of association would include, for example, how easy is it to register an organization? Or, as we have heard, you have mentioned the case of Kisa, but also others, even deregistration of organizations, or, as in Greece with the new law, very high obstacles for organizations to register if they, for example, want to work in refugee camps. Also, still under the field of legal, we have this whole area of criminalization of the work of organizations, criminalization of humanitarian assistance, and some of your member organizations, you might have really run into problems because of that. And then, of course, the whole question of rescue at sea, criminalization of that, etc. But also then, still under the laws, the foreign funding rules in some countries, etc. Then the second area is the access to resources and finance. And I think it sounds very obvious. It's always difficult to find enough funding. But when we look more deeply into these issues, it's not just about the availability of funding and how easy or not easy is it to access the funding. We know about these problems with the eligibility criteria. Is your organization registered? Is it big enough? Does it have enough turnover to be able to apply, etc.? But when we look also at your work and at the concrete implementation of that work, from our side, we see three main problems. The first one is that very often funding is provided for service provision, yes, and so many of you will be service providers. So that money is more often there than money for awareness raising and for advocacy and watchdog work of organizations. The second problem is that very often the funding cycles are really too short. So in all the human rights areas, including in anti-trafficking, for a sustainable project to develop it and to implement it, it takes years, really. But very often the funding is for 2 or 3 years, sometimes even for half a year, which we are in our work also criticizing, because it's not enough. So it would be good to have at least 5-year funding circles. And then also, still under funding, it is really problematic that it's a lot of project funding, but not a lot of funding for the infrastructure of an organization. So, for example, funding of office space, of meeting facilities, of a coordinator who could do all the necessary work, for example, until you get a project approved and you get funding for a specific project. But there is a lot of work around that. Then the third point is access to the decision making. So how to influence policy making. And again, I think here your organizations are maybe in a bit better position because very often there exist strategies at national level, at EU or international level, where civil society are mentioned as having a specific role. So at least it is foreseen. In many other areas, it's really difficult for organizations to access the policymakers and to give input. So across the EU, very often there are no minimum standards or practices of how civil society should be involved in lawmaking or policy making. So we've seen cases that in one bigger, it was in Germany some years ago, organizations had exactly 1 day to respond to a whole new legal package on asylum. And of course, that's impossible. So the timelines for consultation are a problem. But the quality of consultation too often depends also on the concrete desk officer in the absence of binding guidelines of how this should be done. And then another issue that is mentioned also in the consultation very often from organizations is that there is a lack of feedback. So of course it's understood that authorities will not take all the comments on board, but then there is often a lack of feedback of why certain things were taken on board, but why others were not taken on board. And the fourth point that we identify as the key obstacles is the whole area of threats and attacks. And we have heard about it earlier today as well. From our research, we can see, and from the consultation, for example, that over a third of respondents say that their organization has experienced negative media campaigns. So that was not against the sector as a whole, but really against their organization. And many experience also online threats and harassment. So over almost a third as well. But we are even seeing physical attacks on activists and physical attacks on buildings with graffiti or bomb threats and the like. Surveillance also. We had almost 10% said that they had a feeling that there was surveillance against their organization. So in a nutshell, these were the main issues that we have identified over the years. Of course, in every year, in every country, there are some issues that become a bit more prominent or are getting resolved as well. We have seen some progress as well. For example, in several countries, registration for organization has become easier. More donors are discussing core funding. Or to give another example, more countries have actually developed better mechanisms and more accessible one-stop shops, for example, online portals for their consultations. So there are also positive developments, quite a number, and we can come to this in the debate. Finally, I just wanted to mention that next week, actually, the agency is presenting the new report on civic space in the EU, where these issues are described in detail, and we also give recommendations both to the EU level but also to member states of how this should be addressed so that organizations can really do their important human rights work.
Thanks so much. Yeah, as you already referred, some issues can be discussed more in the plenary. The last question to me, and then I open the floor for questions, and I would in particular also, because we have her on the stage, also invite La Strada Poland to react. It's one of the founders of La Strada International, and also facing a lot of difficulties in Poland. But before I do, she's already gone. Then I'll come back to you on the questions. Maybe we can have all the speakers online, and then I still later on give have one concluding questions for the speakers. Who wants to raise a question? And if you want to raise a question, there's a microphone. Please walk to the microphone, introduce yourself, and then raise your question, and also to who your question is. I'll give you time, but then I'll start with Johanna here on the stage. Johanna, you heard a lot. Your organization is one of the founding organizations of La Strada International, but also of the first La Strada program back in 1995. You've been working nearly as long, I think, for 25 years, and actually today is also the anniversary of La Strada Poland, the 26th anniversary, and you were there already at the time. Also Stana Buchowska, who's here, was also there at the time. So I was wondering, can you shortly reflect, and maybe you have also a question to one of the speakers, but how do you see, how's the situation in Poland, and do you have any question to the speakers?
So thank you. Thank you, Susanna, for giving me opportunity to say something. here are three of us, founders of first La Strada. Also, Berbel is with us. And I'm concerning the situation in Poland, I'm rather optimistic for today. It can be strange for you because people coming from Poland always cry about the situation and complain. But when I think about this 26 years, I think that we are really succeed. I hope Stana thinks the same, because few of us, both of us, and were built this success, and Stana is also one of architects of Polish success with combat against trafficking. So, when we started a civil society organization, it was good time, because we were one of the first. Now, there is thousands of organizations, and they are dealing with absolutely each problem. But with the issue of trafficking, is still dealing only La Strada in Poland. So that's why we were sentenced for for very hard work, but also for being a pioneer. Because everything we achieved in Poland was achieved thanks to our lobbying, our work, and our very, very hard job. All changes of law, all maybe not privileges, but rights for human trafficking victims are present, are existing because of La Strada work. And so maybe now the space for civil society organization is not so friendly. Especially in Poland, we had talk about it today too. But the space for human trafficking, sorry, it's bigger. That's why we have to work more and more hard. And so I start to complain. It's not good. But anyway, we are glad because of what we achieved in Poland, because thanks to our work, we have the national program for against human trafficking. We have the National Center for Victims of Human Trafficking. So anyway, the awareness and prevention activity was cut, but we still have it. What more? This is just the reflection. Yeah. When somebody wants to ask, yeah, feel free.
And then, of course, you're never completely sure each year. I remember if you continue to get your support for this national center. Is there anyone in the audience who wants to take the microphone and to raise a question? Yes, go ahead. The microphone is yours. You can just line up and then we'll see you and then you can have your question. And say your name, please.
Okay, Stana Buchowska, co-founder of La Strada in Poland and La Strada International. It's rather a reflection than, yes, you are right. The anti-trafficking organization like La Strada and anti-trafficking situation in Poland has been improved significantly, and also the situation of trafficked persons was improved significantly in Poland. But if I am looking at the whole situation in the context of the civil society, and out of sudden I found myself in listening to the media, what is in the media, where the terms like gender, human rights, LGBT are used as an offensive words without even not understanding what it means. So it makes me feel not so optimistic, because my, understanding of the situation is to what extent and how long anti-trafficking work and anti-trafficking organization will take advantage of the privileges. It's true, we were privileged, because you have to remember, some of them you have to remember, where 80 journalists came to the first press conference in Poland, and we were green like the spring grass with the it was after
but
3.
We were full of hope.
Yes, we were determined. we were green. We were determined, and we were
very, very loud.
Sure, but we were also convinced that we will make a difference. We really believe in our strength,
and we did it.
Yeah, but it was the time when Helsinki Human Rights Foundation has a very strong position, where activists, LGBT activists, human rights activists were well respected by
it was Festival of Human Rights in
Festival
Poland
of Human Rights. And what shall I say now, today or these days, if walking on the streets of Budapest, the Goebbels-like propaganda from the posters at the tram stops and bus stops about George Soros, for instance, is, attacking you, and why the Central European University have been moved there, And if I am looking for you are not saying it, I am saying it, as a person from a little bit outside now. If I look for the dirty political games in Poland and in other Central European countries, I am really afraid. We are talking a lot about the pandemia. I am afraid more on the pandemia of the rightist development of the social political directions into the right and radical anti-human rights, anti-migrants, anti-minorities, and so on and so forth. So this is my concern.
Thank you very much. I would like to invite
I'm afraid about this too.
Yeah.
So my optimism concerns the situation of La Strada in Poland in this year.
Thanks. I would like to remind you that we still have the UN Rapporteur online with us, the representative of FRA, Waltraud, and also Petya here. So I invite you all to line up for the microphone and to see if you have any questions for them while they're still here with us. And of course, short interventions is possible, but keep them short, because let's make use of this opportunity. Evelyn Probst.
We are lining up, and I would like to use this opportunity also. We missed the European coordinator, but maybe since we're still online and we can transport it, and she really asked us for our opinion and for our knowledge, I would really like to give her, in the sense of the continuity that in the last European platform, civil society platform, we got the promise by Onidi, the acting anti-trafficking coordinator, that they will take a look on the revision of the 2004 directive. And I think it's quite important, especially also following up what Stana said, that we have to be very aware of that we in this anti-trafficking field are again combined with the migration fields, and we have to be very active and careful that this anti-migration movement, what is happening, also part of the pandemic, what you said, Stana, that we take it up and are supportive in this field and not exclusive. Fortunately, we could work a little bit with the help of the Council of Europe, with the support of the Council of Europe in our research, which is called REST, and you find some copies out there, where we analyzed into depth what is the situation now in accessing residence permits, but also in accessing residence permits, but in also accessing international protection, asylum for trafficked persons. And we want to go into depth and also to design a proposal for a revision of the 2004 directive, where I think it's a lot more urgently needed than any revision of the 2011 directive. This is like my message as heading the consortium of the REST project as LEFE, who is working now as a migrant rights organization since more than 36 years in this field of protecting migrants' rights. But I also have a question to our representative of the FEMM, since you were really much going into depth into analyzing what is the shrinking space of NGOs. We have since now a couple of years, and I think 2012, 2013, the European Civil Society Platform. And a couple of us are members there, but Strada International never was accepted as a member. And we assume also, because Strada International is a critical voice in this field, and it's a lobby surrounding, and not a grassroots, like we are all grassroots, but our head not. And there's a distinction between service providers who are like taken seriously only with examples, but there is still not the impact of when the examples are taken together and analyzed into depth. I hope you understand what I mean. And this is what we are representing as network. And my question to you is, and it's more a question to advise us, because we have this platform and we are always very unhappy with the outcome, because there is no control on by the participants of the platform what is done with this knowledge, what we are debating there. There's hardly any influence what is debated there. And we also don't know what is the role we are having if in the directive is stated that we should be there for policy making included. This is part of the directive. It's not service provision, it's policy making. And whereas then on the European level is policy making. So this is a really open question to you. What can we do to change that? What is your experience? Where is like the angle to go in there? Yeah, that's for the moment.
Thank you. Waltraud, can you answer?
You want me to come in right away?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for this question. I have to say, I don't know how the civil society platform on anti-trafficking operates and what their criteria are for organizations to join, so I cannot comment on that part. But since Diane Schmitt is new in the post, maybe there is a point in bringing it up with her again and to discuss about the membership and also how the platform works. But you bring up a point also that we see much more widely for many, and I've very briefly mentioned this in my intervention when I spoke about access to policy making. It's often not clear what are the minimum standards of how civil society should be involved, even if it's mentioned in a policy or sometimes even a legal document. And I think there it's really important that civil society doesn't tackle this sector by sector, because it's really a cross-cutting issue that we see on all the different strands of work. For the European Commission, I know that at least for the EU institutions, there is an internal document that obliges the Commission for any legal or policy proposal to do an online consultation before. So that's maybe not much, and I know that an online consultation is not always the right tool, but it's something. And for many other processes, especially at national level, not even this minimum requirement is there. And there are a number of EU umbrella organizations, notably Civil Society Europe, Civic Forum, who are trying to bring up since couple of years, especially also with the EU institutions, the need for the implementation of the so-called Article 11 of the Treaty on European Union, which is the article that stipulates that the EU should engage in civil dialogue with civil society organizations. And it's not at all specified what is meant by this article, and there is no processes at the moment to implement that. And I think this is what you see reflected possibly as you describe it in this specific platform. But I think it will need a wider advocacy effort of different organizations to tackle this, not just for your specific platform, but more as a cross-cutting issue. Also for other areas. And then also what we see, this lack of, you mentioned the lack of, if I got you correctly, you don't know where this leads to, what is the outcome, what is the lack of feedback. This is something that is extremely common for all the different areas, and this is something that we get also from our consultation with civil society. And of course it's problematic. It's problematic not only because you don't get this input, but also because we think, and we also say that in our report, that it will reduce the motivation and the readiness of civil society to give input. And for policymakers, so we haven't talked at all about our recommendations to member states, or to EU institutions, but we have a number of recommendations. And on this area, I think it's really important that policymakers not only set up processes, how to involve civil society, but there is really understanding of the added value. It's not just to tick the box. It's also because really, and we have seen, we're giving some good examples where this is happening. Of course, the outcomes are improved. And we've heard all speakers today saying, we need your input. You are the closest to the ground, etc. So it improves the quality of the outcomes, but it also improves the ownership among those who we work with, if they were involved. And I think this understanding needs to sort of gain more ground. And then I still wanted to make a remark which goes a bit beyond what you asked. That is, we know that, and it comes back to the access to finance as well. So very often in your area and other areas, civil society is called on, in many EU strategies, civil society is called on to play an important role. But then somehow it seems to be expected that civil society does that in their own free time, basically. And I think there is a gap. If civil society is expected to do many things, then there must be adequate funding, either core funding or at least project funding for civil society to be able to do that.
Thank you very much. I see that there's someone else here near the microphone. Marjan Weijers, you can raise your question. Oops.
She was interviewing me to last.
Yeah, my name is Marjan Weijers. I was at the cradle, you said it, of the Foundation Against Trafficking in Women in the Netherlands, which is now Comensa, but Comensa is very different from how we started. We were much more activist and rights-based. And in that sense also at the cradle of La Strada and La Strada Poland, so Johanna, Stana. I have two questions, in fact. My first question is about the EU directive on trafficking, which, well, part of what the directive does is to protect the rights of victims of trafficking and the right to support, even if it's insufficient and we would like to have more, it does. However, trafficking mostly sees on how people arrive in a situation of forced labor or slavery-like practices, while the actual human rights violation, of course, is the exploitation of people under forced labor or slavery-like conditions. So now we have this strange situation that if you arrive in a situation of forced labor or slavery-like exploitation, and you come there through trafficking, you have a number of rights which are protected by the Trafficking Directive. But if you are exploited in a forced labor or slavery-like conditions and not arrive there through trafficking, basically you don't have rights. So we have a quite strange and I think not compatible with the human rights principles, distinction between victims of forced labor and slavery-like exploitation who arrived there through trafficking and those who came there through other ways. Basically, I think that's not acceptable. So what I would like to know, and that's a question to the EU trafficking coordinator, but also to the chair of FEMM, and I think also to the special rapporteur. Basically, I feel we should extend the rights that trafficked persons have to any victim of forced labor and slavery-like practices. My experience from 30 years working on the issue is that there is a tremendous resistance to expanding rights, even if they are, not as much as we want, of victims of trafficking to victims of forced labor and slavery-like practices. I would really like to have your opinion on that. That is my first question. My second question is about the involvement of groups and communities who are affected by trafficking and by anti-trafficking measures in particular. Unions were mentioned. I think some other groups were mentioned. But there are also groups who are not that well organized or represented, like domestic workers, for instance, undocumented migrants, and particularly the involvement of sex workers as one of the groups who is disproportionately affected by trafficking because of their lack of rights, stigma, which makes them vulnerable, exclusion, marginalization, and that kind of things, but also disproportionately affected by anti-trafficking measures who tend to undermine their safety, their health, their rights, which in fact makes them more vulnerable for trafficking and for exploitation. So I would also like to hear from a number of, especially I think the chair of the FEMM committee and the anti-trafficking coordinator, what steps are taken to involve sex workers in the development, the implementation and the evaluation of anti-trafficking policies as one of the groups that is disproportionately affected by both trafficking and anti-trafficking measures.
Thanks, Marjan. I think we still have time later on for one or two questions, also thinking about the time. Unfortunately, as you noticed, the FEMM chair is not with us, but sent in a statement. Also, the AU Anti-Trafficking Coordinator has left, but I'm sure that they will get these questions still from us. And we still have Siobhan Mullally online, but also Petya Nestorova, who wants to react on this. So I give the floor first to Siobhan Mullally. Can you react?
Thank you. Specifically in relation to labour exploitation and trafficking for the purpose of labour exploitation, I think there are significant gaps which are very well documented in relation to implementation of the prohibition of trafficking for the purpose of labour exploitation, including in sectors such as domestic work, or agriculture or fisheries, which may be more hard to reach. But the legal framework applies to the purpose of labour exploitation. So it's not a gap in terms of the legal framework as such. It is a gap in relation to implementation. And I think understanding of what constitutes trafficking for the purpose of labour exploitation, so that it is not always identified as such and not prosecuted as such. So numerous reports have highlighted that. Greta has, of course, identified trafficking for the purpose of labour exploitation as a thematic priority, published a general report on that, and there is work ongoing, which I'm sure Petya will talk about, at Council of Europe level in relation to strengthening understandings and the legal framework on labour exploitation. But the legal instruments are there. We've significant case law under the European Convention on Human Rights, including in particular the Chowdhury and others versus Greece, which was the first judgment of the court specifically on trafficking in relation to labour exploitation, and is a very strong judgment in relation to the positive obligations of states, not only to identify victims, but to ensure that there are effective operational measures in place to investigate and prosecute trafficking for the purpose of labour exploitation, and to ensure effective access to remedies. And certainly those are themes that we are highlighting in our intervention to the UK Supreme Court as well, in relation to domestic workers. So that, I think, in relation to that part of the question, it's at UN level also, labour exploitation, trafficking for the purpose of labour exploitation is repeatedly raised. Any communications we receive into the mandate, and we do receive communications specifically on labour exploitation, those are responded to. But I think there are really significant gaps on the ground, also in terms of resourcing of labour inspectorates, in terms of their reach and effectiveness, and linked to shrinking civil society space. You know, we see increasing range of sectors where there's very limited participation of workers in trade unions. There's limits on collective bargaining, and it's very difficult for trade unions to operate. And in sectors such as domestic work, that's another difficulty, of course. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Marianne, I would like to ask Petya and Nestorova also to react, because he wanted to react to your questions, and then you can still get the floor.
I'm not talking about victims of trafficking. I'm talking about victims of forced labor and slavery-like practices who came in that situation without being trafficked. And they fall outside the protections that there are for trafficked persons, while the actual human rights violation, of course, is also always the exploitation, not the recruitment of the transport. So what about those persons who are a victim of forced labor, of slavery, exploitation, or slavery-like conditions, who didn't arrive in that situation through trafficking?
That is covered. It's covered, for example, that's part of the context of the Chowdhury and others judgment at the European Court of Human Rights also. So people may arrive, may be recruited, may believe that they are being recruited to work in ordinary work with work permits, etc. And then a situation of exploitation arises later, but that's still covered by the legal trafficking framework and should be investigated and prosecuted as such, and remedies provided. So it's a misunderstanding of the legal framework, but I think Petya is going to come in on that. Thanks.
Yes, Petya.
Well, yes, just to supplement what Siobhan said, I think that the ILO conventions, and in particular the 2014 protocol to the Forced Labor Convention, which is quite strong on protection of the victim, including right to compensation and non-punishment in the forced labor context, because that's the ILO terminology as opposed to, human trafficking terminology that we at the Council of Europe are using more. I have the feeling that that could, in a way, provide for rights and protections. What I wanted to say is that, interestingly enough, what you're raising in the question, the UK in their Modern Slavery Act specifically apply to both human trafficking and all the other what is modern slavery. So we have also national legislation here and there which specifically makes it sure that it's not just the trafficking victim, but also and I just wanted, as I have the floor, to mention to you that Greta is engaging with the civil society groups that you mentioned. Recently we had a visit to France in February, and we met associations of persons engaged in prostitution. We made associations of also, to the extent that's possible, undocumented migrants. So at least Greta is hearing the voices of different stakeholders that you mentioned.
Yeah. Michelle, and then, because we have only 5 minutes left, unfortunately, time goes quick. And then I would like to ask the three panelists for the last recommendation to the NGOs. So Michelle, be short, unfortunately, but raise your point and your question.
I can't be more in agreement of this very interesting discussion that's just gone on before, which is about really how we have laws and we don't really implement them, and we have great problems with the actual lawyers who are supposed to be representing people. We know this goes on all the time in Denmark. We are very concerned about the criminalization of trafficked people, but also the criminalization in general of migrants. And this is increasing in Denmark day by day. Now over the last year, particularly working together with a survivor of human trafficking who has a great ability to actually get the trust and provide counselling for people who otherwise would not be talking. In other words, in fact, a lot of men who are either forced into crime, they have fraudulent documents on them. This group are very much a group which are penalized and victimized by the state. So I think that when we're talking about criminalization, the criminalization of victims of trafficking still occurs, but it is connected to also the criminalization of migrants. In Denmark, for example, we are now building the prison, Ellebæk, which is notorious as a place which in fact has been accused of torture in the way that immigrants are treated, and where many of the trafficked victims we have found in this prison who have been there for a considerable amount of time. What I'm concerned about, and I think Hope Now is concerned about, many NGOs are concerned about, is that sometimes states, even states which have been known for their fight for human rights and for gender rights, are falling into the category of, in fact, criminalizing a whole group of people. And they are building the prisons, and they are not implementing the law. And they are actually twisting things to their advantage so that they can, in fact, get votes. I'm wondering what can be done about this. And of course, along with that, we have the shrinking civil society, which is often done also in a way very subtly by the government, which basically means let's make sure they have no funding, because money is power and influence. So how can we try to change that? My organisation is called Hope Now, so hopefully we can move forward with something optimistic to create positive change.
Thank you very much, Michelle. I know we have only 2 minutes left, and we are also live broadcasted, but I want to give the three speakers still the floor for a very short reflection, maybe one recommendation or maybe a short reaction to the last speaker, the last question. And then I think we will gather in the reception, and we hope that we can today, but also the coming days, there's a lot of food for thought to discuss those issues further. Siobhan, Mullally, I would like to thank you already very much for your participation. I'll do that already now because of the time, and I want to give you the last opportunity for your comment.
Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the reception and rest of the evening. Just in response to the last comment and generally to conclude, I would encourage NGOs and organisations working with victims of trafficking to engage with the process of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights on shrinking civil society space. The High Commissioner is required to report next year on steps being taken to address shrinking civil society space, and also to highlight the trends and concerns arising. And I think there it's an opportunity to highlight the ways in which NGOs and organisations working to support victims of trafficking are being affected by the trends towards criminalisation of migrants and shrinking civil society space. So I think to engage more broadly with the human rights organisations on that, and please feel free to get in touch directly with my mandate in relation to specific individual instances of violations, but also in relation to concerns around a legislation or policy framework that is impeding or negatively impacting on the work of civil society organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we'll definitely get in touch with you again. Then, Waltraud, can I give you the last moment to react?
Thank you. Yeah, so there have been many learnings that also civil society activists shared, so it's hard to condense it. But I would say, in regards to civic space, 3 main things. The first is for civil society to be aware of the different challenges and to build capacity also, legal capacity, capacity of digital and physical safety, learning from others, peer exchange about how to address these things. And I would really like to underpin what Siobhan Mullally said about using existing tools that you can, including the different UN mandates. So we work very closely, for example, with the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders in this work on civic space, and we know from her that from inside the EU there are hardly any complaints, although of course there could be. So there are different routes. So yes, complain. In our consultation we saw that we asked, if you experienced any of these threats and attacks, did you complain? And the vast majority said no, we didn't. And then we asked back, why don't you complain? And there are a number of different reasons given. One is the incident wasn't important enough. Well, we also know from conversations that very often activists seem to think that a certain level of harassment is part of their job, but it's not. And it should be made visible also to the public. Many people in public do support a lot of the type of work that civil society do, and they would actually be quite shocked. So my first point, be aware about the challenges and be vocal about them to the public, but also to the different avenues that are available. The second point is, I think, really important to develop a different narrative about the work and about civic space. So not so defensive, but more proactive in the sense of the technical term is hope-based communications, but basically what it means is to communicate not so much about all the things that don't go well, but also about the important contribution of civil society to society. And to give one concrete example, what I mean about changing the framing and the narratives. So we have worked a lot with neuroscientists about that. And the point that they make is also always to communicate what you want to see and not what you don't want to see. For example, in Hungary, organizations for a long time always tried to counter the narrative of the government and say the government said CSOs who receive foreign funding are foreign agents. And the civil society tried to counter and said, no, we are not foreign agents. We do work for society and so on. The neuroscientist would tell you by combining and by repeating the narrative and combining in the same sentence the word civil society with foreign agent, in the heads of the audience, over long term, will create an association between those two terms. So don't fall in this trap, don't go into these counter narratives, and don't create these associations that you don't want to see. And the last point is about resilience. I know it's not very often mentioned, but I think it's absolutely crucial for civil society to build both organizational resilience, but also individual resilience of activists. In many conversations that I have with organizations, with activists, that's actually, it is somehow in awareness, but it's also a bit of a blind spot. So I'm talking about organizational development, but also peer learning, network of partners, crisis plans for what happens if parts of your work or your staff or volunteers are attacked, but also the individual resilience. We know human rights work, your work, is the work of individual people. And the strength of these individual people will determine how strong and effective the work can be in the end. Thanks.
Thanks very much. We look also forward to the upcoming reports that you both mentioned, both the report by the UN Special Rapporteur in the relationship also with terrorism, but also the upcoming report on shrinking civic space by the FRA later this month. And then lastly here on stage, Petya, what are your last words for the NGOs?
at least at the highest political level of the Council of Europe, there is a very clear message that the organization as such is fully supporting civil society. There are ministerial decisions, strategic priority of the Council of Europe Secretary General to strengthen the protection and promotion of civil society space in Europe. And also the level of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. There is a general rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders. So throughout the organization, the concern of the shrinking civil society space is addressed, as I said, through the Secretary General's strategic framework, through the recommendations of the Committee of Ministers, through the Conference of International NGOs. Okay, so the messages are clear, and yet we see the gap between the official position and what is happening in countries that were mentioned today. Azerbaijan was not mentioned, but it's another country, Turkey, Russia, etc. They're Council of Europe member states, not EU member states, of course. So what I think we should be continuing to do is through treaty-based monitoring bodies such as Greta, through the factual, objective evaluation of obligations that states have entered into, through the reports that Greta is establishing periodically, to continue clearly documenting what the situation of civil society is in relation to the anti-trafficking agenda, and then this, taking these messages up again to sort of show the contrast between as I said, what is happening in reality and what is the political message. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And when you said it, I would like to refer to the OSCE study earlier, who also raised the issue of the shrinking space. I would like now to close this event. I would like to thank you all very much for participating and your contribution. It has been a pleasure to have you here. We thank you very much, and we definitely hope to continue to cooperate with you closely, and also with you, of course. Thank you all very much.